In this video, I'm going to show you some techniques that you can use to create straight lines and more kind of uniform shapes. And it has to do with utilizing either the snap to grid or snap to guidelines options for the ruler. So I'm going to click and bring the ruler or the grid in. And I apologize, it was grid, not ruler, but I'm going to bring the grid up. And if I right click on the ruler that goes around the design page, I can choose this snap to grid. And the nice thing about snap to grid is that whenever you click a point, it's going to automatically snap it to one of the kind of intersections of a grid. So let's go ahead and choose snap to grid. And I'm going to grab my artwork tool. So I'm going to zoom in a little bit so you can see how this kind of works. So if I wanted to create like a plus symbol and I wanted to be very accurate, this is a great way to do it. So I can click, watch what happens. If I click right here, it automatically threw it to that intersection of the grid. If I come over here and if I go a little bit beyond and I click, it's going to automatically select it there. What happens if I go about halfway? It'll drop it in there. So you have to know that when you're working with snap to grid, you have to get it pretty close to one of the points and it will snap to it. So I'm just going to finish creating this. You can see I'm not going to get perfect in like where I'm going to click, but it's going to actually make a perfect plus symbol. Now I can right click and you can see very straight and accurate. So this is a really, really good way of creating straight line designs. And especially if you have to do something that is a little bit more complicated than what you can use with just a standard artwork tool or one of the artwork shapes. This is just a really good way of creating shapes like what you see right here. It's the easiest way to make sure that everything is uniform. Everything lines up horizontally and everything lines up vertically. So this is a very good way of creating designs. Now, at the same time, if you create straight lines and you're using this grid, if I right mouse click to set it and I go to my selection tool and I go to edit, now watch what happens. We learned in the previous one about curving lines by clicking on it and dragging it when we're in the edit mode. If I click and drag, watch what happens. As I get close to something, it's kind of snapping to it. See how that works? And it's snapping to it from the point in which I clicked on the line here. Okay, so if I click over here, notice that I'll get a little bit different of a result. But that snap to grid works even when you're kind of reshaping something. So just wanted to point that out. You can create some different looks by doing that, clicking and dragging. But the snap to grid is very handy. And I will say that you can zoom in. Now I can make this as large as I want just by clicking and dragging it. All I wanted to do was create the perfect shape. Now, the one thing that frustrates people at times is they forget to turn it off. So let's say I turn this grid off and I go back to the artwork tool. And as I start clicking, I'm trying to do a design. And let's say I'm trying to curve around something. I'll just be like, why is it throwing it up there when I just clicked right here? And be like, what's going on? Why is it not accurate where I'm clicking? Well, it's because snap to grid is still turned on. Even though you don't see the grid is still there. So if I click right here, you'll notice that every point was everywhere on an intersection of the grid. So even though you can't see the grid, if you have snap to grid on, it's still going to snap to it. So you have to remember to turn that off. And again, that's by right mouse clicking on the ruler and unchecking this snap to grid. So the other thing that I use in helping to create good, clean, accurate lines is I use the guidelines. And guidelines are something we discussed in a previous video, but I'm going to focus on one design here at a time. I'm going to zoom into this one and notice that it's pretty straight up and down across. Everything is pretty symmetrical. So if I'm creating a shape like this and I want it to be, I want these to line up, I want these to line up, I want these points to line up, everything to be symmetrical, this is where I might choose to use guidelines, and I might choose to use it over the grid because the grid might not, I might not be able to put the point right here because maybe the grid is a little bit off of this shape. And that's something you have to keep in mind too. Sometimes you'll want to use guidelines instead. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to line everything up with guidelines. Everywhere that I would actually click, I want there to be an intersection. So I'm going to click on the horizontal ruler here. I'm going to drag it to where these meet. So the top and the bottom. But I'm going to click it everywhere that I would put a point. I would put a point right here. And the reason is because I'm going to put a point right there. I'm going to put one right here. I'm going to put one right here. I'm going to put one right there. So I'm going to drag these lines over to where it touches a place where I'll put a point. So that's horizontally, but I have to do the same thing vertically because I have to have an intersection. So I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to pull it down to where it touches right here along this line, right here, here, and there. Hopefully that makes sense. And it will once I start clicking here. So I'm going to leave this one out right here just for sake of showing you what will happen. So I'm going to click that one. So now I have this shape here. Now I want to trace it. This is going to really help me make it very accurate. So I'm going to right click on this ruler. And instead of snap to grid, this time I'm going to choose snap to guidelines. These are the guidelines here. So snap to guideline, grab my artwork tool, and watch what happens. If I get up here and I click, it threw it right at that intersection. Just like when I was working with a grid, although I'm now controlling where I want the lines to be. So right here, if I click right there, notice it dropped it right in here because I have a vertical and a horizontal. It's going to throw it where those two meet. So I'm going to ignore this one because that has to do with this line. So I'm going to go up to this one, click, come down here, click, click. Just getting it close. This is where I left out that horizontal line right here. This is where it comes, like the reason why you want to have vertical and horizontal is it's not going to throw it right here unless I click right there, because it's going to snap to any guideline. So if I don't have an intersection, it'll snap it to this one. It'll snap it right there. Or I could come up here and notice it snapped it right to this line. Because I don't have a horizontal line right here, it's not going to throw it right in that intersection. But I can click right there and click here, and I've just closed out this shape. And now notice that I've created my own shape that is very clean and accurate. And so when we move on to these other ones, first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to right click and I'm going to choose remove guidelines because I want to create my own new guidelines for this shape. So it just clears them out. So let's go over to this one. This one would take a little bit more work, but again, I'm going to do all the horizontal lines and the vertical. So on this, I'm going to go everywhere that I would click. So the reason I'm putting this one is because of right here. Now I need one along this line. I need one that covers this area, or that point, I should say, right there, and right there. So now I have the horizontal, and I like to work horizontal or vertical first. I do all of them one way, and then I go in and I do the next one. the other, like this case, vertical. So I'm making sure that I have an intersection everywhere that I'm going to have to click in creating this shape. And you might think this is crazy to do, but if I'm really needing to get this accurate, this doesn't take very long at all, but the payoff is huge, because now when I go and I click the artwork tool, I can just get it close to where I need to go and just click, and it's going to throw it perfectly where I need it to be every time. And this is going to help me to make a very accurate shape. So it's actually faster to do it this way by putting those points there, or the guidelines, and snapping to it. You can see I created a very accurate shape. So let me right click and remove guidelines here. I use snap to grid and snap to guidelines all the time when I'm creating designs, and I'm looking for places I want to make sure that they line up well. So like in this case, I want to make sure that it lines up evenly right here, so I'm just drawing, and down here at this bottom right here. So even though the artwork doesn't line up perfectly there, I want it to. So I've now created my horizontal lines that I need. Now I can do the vertical, so I need one to be right there so it can handle this little intersection. I need one right here, here, and here. So now I've covered the areas, those points. So now I can come in with the artwork tool, click, 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 and I'm using the method that you've seen in a previous video, where I'm going to bend the lines after the fact. So a thing to keep in mind, I still have snap to guidelines. So you can notice that my cursor is snapping to the line. So when I'm bending this, I'm going to want to actually come in and remove this snap to guidelines so that I can accurately come in here and modify this shape to get it to fit around. And you'll see that this will take me a couple times to do this shape here, but it'll be very clean when it's done. So you can see I could come in here, I could clean it up. I'm not going to clean it up each time by clicking on these anchors and moving them, but I just wanted to show you that now I have a very accurate, these are straight across, everything is very symmetrical. So I want to show you one more here, and it's this tree design. So I'm going to remove the guidelines so that I'm working with a clean slate. I'm going to come in here, and I'm going to do the same thing, but notice that this part of the tree is not going to line up with the center of this. So I'm going to actually use the guidelines to correct this shape. Okay, so I'm going to come in here. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to try to find about the middle of this shape right here, right, or this bottom line right here. And the reason I'm doing that is I want to actually have this point be right there. So I've created this vertical one to help me get it straight, but let's go ahead and put all the vertical lines in that I need and all the horizontal lines that I need. So I'm going to come in over here. So that's going to handle this little trunk area. I'm going to need one right there to handle this. Now I'm focusing on one side, and I didn't point that out, but I'm really focusing on one side first. So the next one would be this point, and this point. So I'm going to do the same thing going across over this way. Find that first one right here. Find the second one is right here. What I mean by second one is vertically where I'm running into it. This one right here. This one right here. in this final one. So I have all the horizontal or the vertical lines I need. Now I need to do the horizontal. And these are not going to line up perfectly either. So what I'm going to do is just decide this one's pretty good. So we'll come right here. Right here. So these are actually kind of accurate. You can see it starts tilting a little bit here. But I don't need to worry about that because I'm going to straighten it out because I'm using these guidelines. And I'm going to make this a much cleaner, better object than the first one. And I need to make sure I get one up here at the top too. So I should have them all now. So what I need to do at this point is just right click and go to Snap to Guideline. I need to grab my artwork tool. And I'm going to start up here at the top. I'm going to click here. And I'm just going to go around this design. And I'm going to get it all straightened out just by using these guidelines. It's going to make sure that everything is very straight and accurate. And this is how I use guidelines in working with designs. So you can see, I'm going to remove the guidelines so that they're hidden. You can see that the path is a little bit different. Let me go ahead and fill this with a different color here. And if I zoom in, you'll really see where it starts changing. But what I've done by doing this is I've created a much more symmetrical tree here. And by using the guidelines, everything now lines up. So this tip of the tree lines up in the middle of this trunk, and before it was very off, as you can see, and this one is right in the middle. So that's how I will use guidelines and grids. So I hope that this is helpful in helping you to create your own shapes, knowing that there's little things that you can do, like using the grid and guidelines to help get a very accurate, clean shape when you're tracing it. So we'll see you in the next video where we're going to be talking about actually editing the lines that we create.